Our last segment in this series is Management Basics. Here we share a few suggested management steps to assure better airfield markings, providing suggestions on equipment, materials, education, and training. Let's drop in on this last segment.
So we've talked about the specifications, we've talked about the inspection, the evaluation. Now we're going to kind of talk about what are the basics of managing the pavement markings. So Mike, I'll let you kind of go through these and get started, and then we'll come back and go to them individually.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, so materials, we're talking about paint and glass. Traditionally, that's what we're using. We're usually using water-based paint, glass beads. With respect to the airfield environment, it is very important, and I think this is more for paint than it is for glass. If you are in an environment that has rust contamination, or you have an asphalt that has some rusty spots, or you see your existing markings are kind of rusty colored, or maybe you have algae or something growing, mold, something growing on top of your markings that's obscuring it. There's certain things that you can do to your paints. Very often you can talk to the manufacturer and have them add a biocide, for example, or add a stain resistant formulation to it to reduce that staining or growth of organisms on top. I will say that the number of quality manufacturers, and specifically paint manufacturers, I can count on one hand that I would use if it were my airport. So understand that they're not all created equal. Be very choosy, and do some homework, do some research about who the best manufacturers are out there. Greg?
Great, I would agree. We're actually let me advance that slide. So we're right now we're talking about the materials section, and I would agree completely on both of those. Is that you really need to do your homework, make sure you're selecting the right materials, because having the right materials is the basis of creating a good, safe, long-lasting, and really ultimately economical line. Each airfield has its unique needs and an environment around it, so you have to take that into consideration. And again, kind of following up on what Mike said, there are only a few type choices, type 1, type 2, type 3 bead, or type paint, or type 1, type 3 beads, but there's a lot of brand choices. So oftentimes type choices are far more easy than brand choices. So be sure to look for that, get references, that type of thing as well. So then let's go ahead and move to the next management aspect, which is the equipment. So basically, on equipment, you either rent or buy quality handheld retroreflectometers for routine inspections. This is something that's available to you. Again, we talked about the three methods of inspection, and one visual, one handheld, and one mobile. Yes, I'm a bit biased here, but if you don't use a retroreflectometer, then you have to deal with you or your inspector's opinions, and those will be biased. So that's why having the equipment, or obtaining the equipment, or we'll talk about in a moment, hiring someone with that equipment, how important that is. Routine inspections are super important. We have to remember that although you may be inspected only once a year, your customers are looking at and depending on these markings every single day. So, Mike, what do you have to say on that?
Yeah, I think the StripeMaster 2Touch is a really good unit. It's very reliable. One thing that we haven't really mentioned is that what I like to do with this for my clients when I'm doing quality assurance is to measure all of the markings per the ASTM and per the FAA spec. But then, because it's GPS enabled, I like to upload them to like on a KMZ file for a Google Earth, and I plot it on their airfield, and they think that's so cool. And I can show them where it passes the FAA criteria where it fails. But I think that's what I think operations, maintenance groups at airports they really find this tool to be valuable for daily inspections. Again, we kind of touched on it. For periodic, you want more of a comprehensive airfield wide inspection. And I'll touch on one more thing that Greg said about the FAA. I think that having that comprehensive look at your, basically by an independent party, is a really good idea. I have already heard from, I'm not going to say where, I've already heard from some airports where the FAA inspector comes in and they will not be toting around reflectometers. That's not what the FAA wants to do. That said, an FAA inspector has already come in and said, "Hey, your markings look non-uniform. I don't think that they're bright enough." Or and then the airport had a reflectometer in. It was not me, so but they had a reflectometer come in, measure the markings, and they were performing well enough from a reflectivity standpoint, but not from a uniformity standpoint. And it became kind of messy. So I guess what I'm saying is, the subjective versus the objective, it gets a little messy. If you could have a report for your inspector to take a look at versus them go out on kind of a limb and do the old eye test, that would be a lot better, I think, for the industry. And it's all about safety. It's all about standardization. Let's make sure that the markings are looking the way they're supposed to look.
Yeah, that's great advice out there for dealing with those situations. And yeah, I'm familiar with that particular situation. And you're right. It was a situation where in this case I think it had to do with the deviation. And yeah, well, you put a retroreflectometer on it and it passed, but then it still didn't look right. And that's where we talk a lot about this inspection needing to make sure that you incorporate the three methods. Incorporate the visual with all of these. Incorporate the handheld with the visual and with the mobile, because a mobile device is really designed for what we call network-wide assessment. So it's really there to, even though it provides a tremendous amount of detail, but it's also to identify hotspots. And in both, as you mentioned, the mobile and the handheld does a real good job at putting this lameness out on a map. You can actually see. You zoom in and you can see the runway, you can see the taxiways, and you can see that little yellow line turn red or green, yellow line turn green, whatever it is. Those are great tools to use, especially when you're sitting in front of your inspector, which really took us into a good segue into schedule routine and different types of inspections. And you touched on this, Mike. Talk a little bit about what you recommend on inspections. Oh, we've got we must have not unmuted. You want to try it again?
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea for daily inspections. I can see, operations agents, operations managers out there on the airfield. They're ultimately responsible for knowing and hopefully knowing objectively whether their markings are performing the way they're supposed to be. So periodic inspections are really fantastic. You got to do that as part of your almost your daily activity. Your daily inspections you've got to do on a daily basis, and your periodic inspections. I think for most airports, and I'm talking about maybe the top 200, as far as size is concerned, annual is probably a good idea. Really, the busier you get, if you want to see trend analysis, maybe increase that to biannual assessments, airfield-wide assessments. And the smaller you get, probably the more you can get out to two, and these instead of annual assessments, doing them biannually every 2 years. I think it's a pretty good schedule.
Yeah, so you would do basically your visual inspection pretty much every time you're out on the airfield, but weekly, kind of just, we'll talk about that in a moment, actually, a little bit more. And then you get into your periodic, which could be every quarter, that type of thing. Handheld, I can see that. Just kind of a rotation thing might be part of your visual checks when you're out there identifying things that, hey, maybe we need to take a look at that. But definitely, I agree with for full assessment, full airfield assessment. If you're going to use a mobile device, definitely, once a year on those larger airports for sure, and then. And then maybe more often, again, like you said, I agree completely with if you're trying to create some type of maintenance schedule, especially the first few, you might have more frequently so that you can see what's happening. Also, by doing that, it's not only predictive maintenance, but it's also and predictive budget requirements, which is always important, but also it gives you a chance to analyze materials used or the application process that's being used. I wrote here as a note that not only are airfield-wide inspections important for safety and compliance, they're also very useful in this predictive maintenance scheduling that we talked about, and it really does make your team more efficient and what they do more effective. We do understand that a lot of you guys are out there and you maintain your own markings, and that's really cool. But the guy that maintains your markings is probably the guy that also fixes your lights or fixes your signs or the sweeping. I mean, there's no telling what else he does. So we
Mows the
have to
grass.
remember. Yeah, mows the grass, So this guy is a multifunctional guy, and so he's not really potentially likely not an expert at pavement marking. So, of course, that's going to get us to really into the next one, which is training. So this says train all airfield personnel on basic inspection techniques to identify potential marking issues in the normal course of duty. This is what we were talking about a moment ago. This is certainly Mike's area of expertise in the airfield. Applying and managing pavement markings is oftentimes, as I said earlier, an added duty for these maintenance guys. And so they lack this specific training, and really, honestly, their markings oftentimes tells the story. And you can overlook the importance of a well-trained striper and for either the roadway or the runway. So that's a very important aspect, is to make sure that your people are trained. I'll pass that back over to Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. This is something that the FAA focused on in the latest revision to the 150 5340-1M, M for Mike. In that AC, which was published or revised and published on May 10th of 2019, so just a few months ago, they added some language that says, and this is paragraph 1.3.8 for anyone that wants to find it. They say personnel involved in the application of airfield surface marking should complete training, which includes surface preparation, removal, and application of surface markings and maintenance standards, period. That is brand new, but they're basically saying, hey, anybody that's doing this marking out there should be trained. And that's a no-brainer, but it's taken us, 10 years to get that really in the circular. I think that it's so important for any aspect of work on an airfield, or really any industry. Training is so key, and it's not just for the guys that do the application. It's not just for the guys that do the painting. This is really for operations people too. So, when you see on this slide, it says, train all airfield personnel on basic inspection techniques to identify those potential marking issues, perhaps risks. We're talking about operations people there. We're talking about our folks that are monitoring the airfields 24/7. So they need to know what to look for too. They need to be able to communicate perhaps with their in-house crew, for example, their maintenance department, exactly what's going on. Maybe they're writing a work order. They can be a little more specific on the issue if they've had training.
Yeah, I think it's so important that again, kind of going back to what we both said, is just that everybody knows what to look for, and I think it makes the system much better all the way around. So next, we're going to education, and so remember we had training, and then we have education, and properly educate marking personnel on specifications, materials, application, and equipment operation. So the training, let's not mix up training and education, because you can be well educated on something but not know how to properly implement that knowledge, and or vice versa. You can know how to install a marking, but you also need to know the what, the why, the where, and the how, and the when, behind the marking. So the education piece is more kind of an in-depth understanding of those things: what, why, when, where, and how. So it's very important to go beyond just, okay, this is how you operate the machine and put a line down, but you need to go deeper, and I think that's where I believe the symposiums and those type of trainings go a little deeper and say, okay, well, this is why you have to do this, or this is what you're trying to achieve. What is our goal here? Our goal is not to get paint on the pavement. Our goal is to have a visible line that meets these requirements. Mike?
Yeah, it's a really nice distinction between training and education. Greg, you sit with me on an oversight committee for the creation of an airfield marking certificate program, the creation of that curriculum. And I think I see the little graduate cap there, and it made me kind of think about the certificate training that we've developed, and it's something that I think that will really help to qualify those that stripe our airfields, whether it be contractors, whether it be in-house crews, really whether it be people that inspect or design these airfield marking projects. And I think it's so important for people not only to have kind of similar knowledge, at least the minimum knowledge areas that we've helped to expand on in that curriculum, the certificate training, but it really will help raise the bar on what the expectation is and what the expectation is for education and also for training.
Thank you for joining us for our segmented video series on the Airfield Marking Assessment Quick Guide. And a special thank you to the Sightline team, who without their experience and expertise, we could not have produced such an informative presentation. Get more information on this series, case studies, tools, equipment, and services for airfield marking assessments at pppcatalog.com/AFM. Again, that's pppcatalog.com/AFM, as in airfield markings. Thank you. Have a great day.